I thought losing my job and moving into my granddad's old cabin was the worst thing that could happen. Then I walked outside one morning and saw the bridge to my driveway sealed off with construction barriers, bright orange signs, and a note from the HOA saying I was restricted from access due to safety concerns. Just like that, I was locked out of my own home. No warning, no hearing, just a clipboard decision made by a group of people I didn't even vote for. But here's the part they didn't expect. That bridge? The one they blocked to teach me a lesson? Yeah, I own it. Legally. On paper. With tax records going back 60 years. While they were busy writing citations about mailbox height and wildflowers, they forgot to check whose land they were standing on. What happened next turned into one of the most satisfying moments of my life. So, if you've ever been pushed around by someone in a cheap blazer with a little too much free time and a fake sense of power, you'll want to stick around. And hey, drop a comment if you've had to deal with someone like that. I'd love to know I'm not the only one. 6 months before everything blew up, I was at my lowest. I'd lost my job at a tech company in Denver after one of the apps I built exposed a major data breach. Instead of fixing the problem, the company shut everything down and blacklisted me from the industry. Then my divorce finalized. My savings? Pretty much gone. With nowhere else to go, I packed up what was left of my life and moved into my grandfather's old cabin by Pine Lake. It wasn't much, small, kind of dusty, smelled like old wood and coffee. But it was mine, and it was quiet. The cabin sat across a short wooden bridge at the edge of a lake, just outside a small housing community. I thought I'd finally caught a break. There were trees, fresh air, and no one bothering me for the first time in months. I spent my first few days fixing up the place, walking by the water, and trying to figure out what came next. Then one morning, I heard the sound of heels on gravel and saw a woman with a clipboard walking across the bridge. She didn't smile, didn't introduce herself, just went straight into HOA rules and why I shouldn't be here. That's when I realized peace wasn't part of the deal. Her name was Margot Keller, and from the second she opened her mouth, I knew I was in trouble. She walked up in an oversized navy blazer, thick glasses that made her eyes look twice their size, and a clipboard so full it could have doubled as a weapon. "I'm Margot Keller, president of the Pine Lake Community Homeowners Association," she said, like she was announcing a royal title. Then she pointed at my truck, which was parked halfway across the little bridge that led to my cabin. "You can't park here. This is community property. Unauthorized vehicles are prohibited." I stayed calm, told her my name, and explained that my grandfather had owned the cabin and the bridge since the 1960s. I even showed her the deed and the property tax statements. She barely glanced at them before pulling out a pen and writing me a citation right there on the spot. It was like she'd come prepared for a fight, and nothing I said mattered. Margot had this way of talking that made you feel like you were back in school and about to fail a test. Every word was slow, clear, and packed with fake kindness. "Property ownership," she said, tapping her glasses, "doesn't give you free access to shared community assets." And just like that, she'd declared war, armed with nothing but rules, paper, and the belief that she was always right. After the bridge parking thing, I figured I'd just follow the rules and keep to myself. I didn't want trouble. But Margot had other plans. The first official citation I got was for my American flag. It was apparently too large compared to the HOA's flag out front. Then came a warning about my mailbox being 2 inches too low. I fixed that with a shovel and some dirt, only to wake up the next day to another citation. This time it was the porch light. Excessive brightness during evening hours. A few days later, she dinged me for the wildflowers planted by my grandfather years ago. They weren't on the HOA's list of approved landscape species. I spent hours digging them out, replacing them with basic shrubs from the local hardware store. Still, the notes kept showing up. One for how my car was angled in the driveway, another for having a gnome in the garden. A gnome, I kept thinking if I just fixed everything, she'd move on to someone else. But it felt like the harder I tried, the more she looked. I wasn't just on her radar. I was her full-time project. It stopped being about rules. It was personal now, and every new citation felt less like a warning and more like a message. I wasn't welcome here, and she was going to make sure I knew it. Just when I was starting to think I couldn't win, Frank showed up. He was one of the older guys on the HOA board, maybe in his 60s, always wearing a faded polo and carrying a reusable coffee cup. He stopped by one morning while I was repainting the mailbox, again, and said, "Hey, I've been watching you try. That counts for something." He seemed different from the others. Calm, understanding. Said Margot could be intense, but claimed she meant well. According to him, she just respected people who followed the rules and didn't push back. "You don't have to fix everything overnight," he told me. "Just show her you care. She'll ease up." At first, I didn't know what to think. But honestly, I wanted to believe him. I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of getting fined for the way a garden looked. So I listened. I trimmed the bushes, swapped the porch light, even picked up some HOA-approved mulch for the flower beds. Frank stopped by again a few days later, smiled, and said, "You're on the right track." For the first time since moving in, I felt like maybe things were turning around. Maybe if I just played it smart, things would calm down. Maybe Margot wasn't out to ruin me. Maybe. A few days after Frank's last visit, I found another envelope taped to my front door. I figured it was just another small fine. Maybe my trash bin lid wasn't secure enough, or something like that. But this time, it was a formal complaint for noise violations. Said I'd been using power tools past 7 p.m. on 3 different nights. The letter was detailed. Too detailed. It mentioned specific tools and times I was supposedly working. The problem? I hadn't touched any tools at night. I'd been extra careful about that. Then it hit me. A few nights earlier, I'd been talking to Frank out in the yard. I'd told him I was planning to clean up the shed and maybe organize my grandfather's old tools later that week. I never actually did it. But that complaint? It described my exact plans, word for word. The timing, the tools, even the part about moving things around inside the shed. I stood there holding that letter, stomach sinking. Frank wasn't just giving friendly advice. He was feeding everything I said straight back to Margot. Every nod, every kind word, every hang in there smile. It was all fake. He'd been playing both sides, keeping me calm while handing her the bullets. That nice guy routine? Just another trick to keep me quiet while they tightened the screws. One morning I woke up to the sound of trucks and voices outside. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw 2 workers in orange vests putting up wooden barriers across the bridge. My bridge. A huge orange sign read, "Bridge closed. Safety inspection in progress." And of course, there was Margot, standing nearby with her clipboard like she was supervising a crime scene. When I asked what was going on, she said the HOA's safety committee had declared the bridge structurally questionable, and it would be closed until further notice. No engineer, no report, just her word. It hit me fast. Without that bridge, I was trapped. No way to drive to town, no deliveries, no groceries. I had to carry food and supplies through a forest trail that took almost an hour each way. When the weather was bad, my only option was a kayak. I tried to keep up with work, but my internet connection started cutting out because the utility trucks couldn't reach the usual access point. I dropped 3 video calls in a row and lost a major freelance contract I was counting on. My body started breaking down. I was losing weight just from walking so much, hauling groceries by hand, constantly on edge. The stress, the isolation, the non-stop pressure, everything was slipping. And the worst part? Margot acted like this was all about safety, like she was doing the community a favor. But I knew better. She'd found a way to cut me off without touching me. This wasn't about a bridge. It was about control. And she had it. After 10 days of being cut off, I dragged myself to the next HOA meeting. I had to hike through the woods, carrying my notes in a backpack, soaked in sweat by the time I arrived. The place was packed. More people than usual, probably curious about the whole bridge mess. I sat quietly while Margot opened the meeting like nothing had happened, reading off her agenda in that same robotic tone. When she finally asked for resident concerns, I stood up and tried to keep my voice steady. I explained what the bridge closure had done, how I couldn't work, how I was hauling groceries through the forest, how no one ever came to inspect the bridge before shutting it down. But as I talked, the exhaustion and frustration started to boil over. My voice got louder. My hands were shaking. At one point, I even said something about the place feeling less like a neighborhood and more like a prison run by a school principal. That part didn't land well. The room went quiet. I could feel eyes on me, but no one said anything. Margot just folded her hands, took a breath, and said, "Mr. Morrison, I think this outburst shows exactly why we need structure and leadership." A few people nodded. That was it. I walked out feeling like I'd lost. Not just the meeting, but the whole fight. That night, I started looking into what it would take to sell the cabin and get out for good. I was in the attic, digging through dusty boxes and old junk while half-heartedly packing up to leave. I'd already started calling real estate agents, figuring there was nothing left to fight for. That's when I found a beat-up old cookie tin tucked behind a stack of hunting gear and faded photo albums. Inside were papers, some folded, some yellowed with age, but neatly kept. At first I thought it was just old mail or junk receipts, but then I saw it. A county permit from 1960, signed and stamped, giving my grandfather permission to build a private bridge over the lake outlet. And right behind it, a letter from the county acknowledging the bridge as private property, plus a record of tax payments made on it every year for more than 6 decades. I sat there in that cramped attic, holding the tin in my lap, realizing something huge. The bridge Margot had blocked, the one she claimed was community property, wasn't hers to touch. It wasn't the HOA's. It wasn't shared. It was mine. Legally, fully documented, paid for, maintained, and still taxed as private property. The next morning, I drove into town and met with the county clerk. He pulled up the records on his computer and confirmed it all. "Yep," he said, like it was no big deal. "That bridge belongs to you." Just like that, the whole story flipped. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the guy who owned the only road in, and they'd been standing on my property the entire time. I walked into the emergency HOA meeting with a folder full of documents and the county clerk sitting right beside me. The room was packed. Word had gotten around that something big was coming. Margot stood at the front, calm as ever, like she still had the upper hand. She started things off with a speech about protecting the community and misunderstandings about property lines. But I didn't let it drag out. When she finished, I stood up, held up the permit from 1960, and said, "This bridge? It's mine. Always has been." Then I handed out copies of the bridge deed, tax records, everything, stamped, signed, and official. The county clerk, who had processed those taxes for over 30 years, backed me up right there in front of everyone. "He owns it," he said plainly. "Always did." That was the moment things started to shift. Margot's lawyer flipped through the documents, clearly caught off guard. He leaned over to whisper something to her, and her face went pale. Around the room, people started talking in hushed voices. Some looked confused, others just embarrassed. You could feel it, like the whole room realized they'd been on the wrong side without knowing it. For months, they'd treated me like the outsider. But the truth? They'd been walking across my bridge the entire time, without permission, without even asking. Once everything was out in the open, I made it simple. I stood up and laid out my terms. Every fine I'd been hit with, dropped. The $4,200 I already paid, refunded. A public apology from Margot, recorded and sent to every resident. And lastly, a $25,000 payment for official easement rights. If they wanted to keep using the bridge, they were going to pay for it. You could hear people shift in their seats. Margot looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She called the terms excessive. I called them fair. But the community was done with her. They took a vote right then and there. It wasn't even close. A few days later, Margot stood in front of a camera, reading an apology she clearly didn't want to say. Her voice cracked halfway through. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like the weight of her authority had finally been lifted, and not in a good way. The HOA made real changes after that. No more quiet rule updates, no more power plays from behind a clipboard. Board decisions now had to go through a proper vote, real transparency, real limits. As for the bridge, I didn't put up a gate or demand tolls. I just added one small wooden sign that said, "Private, please nod before crossing." That's all I wanted. Not control, just acknowledgement. A quiet moment where people realized they were crossing something that didn't belong to them, and were welcome anyway. In the end, it wasn't just about a bridge. It was about standing up when someone tries to take what's yours, and acting like they have the right. Margot lost her grip the moment I stopped playing by her rules and started standing on my own. My grandfather always said, "You don't need permission to defend what's yours." Turns out, he was right. That bridge wasn't just wood and steel. It was proof that real control only works when you let people think they don't have a choice. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, or someone who took their tiny bit of power way too seriously, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. And if stories like this hit home, where the quiet guy doesn't just survive but wins, go ahead and like the video. Maybe even subscribe. I've got more where this came from.